does history get erased? One erases history by stripping people of the truth about who they are and where they come from. Men and women were taken from their lands and their riches stolen from them. For months they traveled on ships. Some would not make it. They arrived to Latin America. These were a people brutally tortured and used for economic gain in the name of development. They were enslaved and told they could no longer speak their languages or practice their religions. They were removed from the only homes they knew. Hundreds of years later, descendants would demand that these stories be excavated from the ruins, and thus began again the search for home. Afro-Latinos, the untaught story, is the recounting of a history that for too long has been left out of the historical text and narratives. There has been much study, research, and emphasis placed on the history of slavery in the United States. Over 12 million enslaved Africans were forcibly brought to Latin America, and an estimated 500,000 were brought to the United States over the span of 400 years. Why then is the African diaspora in Latin America not taught in educational institutions from elementary school to the university level? Many children and adults in Latin America do not know anything about Africa, buying into stereotypes, oftentimes unaware that it is a continent. Afro-Latinos are the descendants of enslaved Africans who were brought by force and dispersed throughout Latin America. Today, there are more than 150 million Afro-Latinos in Latin America, of which 90 million live in Brazil. But does this mean that only people who are Black can claim African roots? For Latin Americans, there is something prestigious and honorable about identifying with being descendants of Europeans. What has been taught is that the royal bloodline from Spain is worthy of respect, pride, and honor. The indigenous is seen as something mystical and exotic, while the African root has always been associated with slavery, poverty, and all things Black. History books refer to Africans only as slaves. There is no mention that some Africans in their territories were kings and queens or men and women of great wisdom, nor does it mention that African kingdoms themselves participated in the slave trade, trading slaves from other kingdoms with European settlers. This story cannot be told without starting in Africa. Contrary to popular belief, Europeans did not enter into the depths of Africa to kidnap people and turn them into slaves. African kingdoms dominated the territories, enslaving small groups of people from other kingdoms. Kingdoms such as Ashanti, Dahomey, Oyo, Benin, and Congo were some of the most powerful. When trade with Europeans began, it benefited the African royals, and the elites grew more powerful. From this trade, an estimated 100 million Africans were taken from Africa and dispersed among every continent. The colonizers knew exactly which humans were of value and had their pick of the finest Africans. The population of enslaved Africans came from many ethnic groups. The Africans who arrived in what is now known as Latin America came mostly from Central and Western Africa. Ethnic groups like the Mandingo, Ashanti, Ewe Fon, Mina, Nago, and Igbo were just a few of those brought over. Cuba was a gathering point for the Arara, Yoruba, Carabali, and Bakongo people. People from Carabali and Yoruba were also scattered throughout Latin America, though it was in Cuba that they came together and maintained their culture. Approximately 240,000 were Carabalis, 200,000 Araras, 400,000 Congoleses, and 275,000 Yoruba people would be enslaved and brought to Cuba, causing the fall of the Oyo Empire in Africa. The plan failed. They rebelled. enslaved Africans joined together and maintained their religious practices as a form of resistance. The Bantu ethnic group was one of the largest groups enslaved. The Bantu had many subgroups, such as the Bakongos and others that were brought from Mexico to Argentina. This heritage is preserved in the Bantu songs found in Argentina.
Un 65% de los traídos hacia Montevideo eran de origen bantú, es decir, Angola, Mozambique, Congos.
The Bantu influence is also seen in Haitian voodoo. The Palenquero language in Colombia also has its roots in Bantu.
Pane nubo vira lengua suto. Maese tan hace trecusa. Monacito di taquilande uriacuyo etan leuncusa di tradición suto.
In Panama, they play and dance to los congos.
Las tradiciones vienen de África y no solamente tenemos el baile congo, tenemos otros bailes, pero el congo sí nace aquí en Portobelo. Es el baile que habló y que hizo muchas cosas para poder defender la libertad en su momento y lograr lo que hoy día somos.
The Dominican Republic also has its congos.
Eso es africano, eso es de cuando los esclavos.
In a span of 400 years, an estimated 7 million enslaved Africans were brought to South America. 5 million were taken to Brazil. Over 4 million arrived to the West Indies, and 300,000 slaves were shipped to Central America. African women contributed greatly to the history and culture of Latin America. One way to honor these women is through gastronomy. In almost all Latin American countries, there is a dish of African origin. Markets like this one in Cartagena, Colombia, offer many foods of African descent. The coconut rice and fried fish are common in Afro-Latino areas. During the slavery era, African women cooked for their masters and prepared for them the best meats and fresh foods. The leftovers were used to feed themselves, the men, and the children. Honduras and Guatemala share the Garifuna culture, which has a distinct and unique history. Garifuna history begins in 1635, when a Spanish ship from Nigeria sinks near the island of San Vicente. These castaway Africans mix with the natives, called Caribs and Arawak. This was the birth of the Garifuna people, indigenous Africans who were free in desolate areas. Their chief, Joseph Chatoyer, and his wife Barauda were Garifuna leaders. On February 20th, 1797, over 5,000 Garinagu exiled from San Vicente to escape English rule. Only half of them made it to the island of Roatan, today known as Honduras. From there, the Garifuna people settled along the coast of Honduras, all the way from the town of Trujillo to the village of Masca. The Garifuna people migrated to the countries of Belize, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua, and to the towns of Livingston and Puerto Barrios in Guatemala. Today, there are about 45 Garifuna villages in Central America. The Dominican Republic, land of merengue and breathtaking beaches. Yet how many people know that English is the native language of some Dominicans? In the Dominican Republic, there were two different migrations of blacks, West Indians and African Americans. After the Haitian Revolution in 1804, the Haitian government welcomed African Americans to come to the island to help rebuild their country. With the desire to escape a racist United States, African Americans from Philadelphia and other U.S. coastal cities migrated to Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
The Afro-Americans came from, they all left out from Philadelphia. Primer grupo fue de Haití, después a Santo Domingo, luego el grupo de Samaná y otro grupo se fue para Puerto Plata.
In 1824, Haitian President Jean-Pierre Boyer financed a trip of North American blacks that wanted to live and work in Haiti. In all, 6,000 people reached the island of Hispaniola, and the African American culture brought to the Dominican Republic still remain in the area of Samaná. When a person from Latin America looks in the mirror, what do they see? The African presence is easily recognizable in the carnivals, festivals, celebrations, and music of Latin America, yet it is much more complex. Latin Americans have a diverse and varied DNA. 500 years and over 15 generations have passed since the Spanish conquest. What is the identity of a Latin American? Today, many people are still confused about how they should identify and what parts of themselves to include. There are many terms used to identify a person in Latin America. Most of these terms come from the caste system. The caste system came with the Spanish and was used to define and classify those of mixtures of African, indigenous, and Spanish blood. There are hundreds of variations in the caste system. There was a classification system implemented with a list of terms that varied by country. However, the most popular terms used were mestizo, indio, sambo, and mulatto. One of the most controversial terms is the use of the word negro or negra. This term brings some positive and negative connotations.
Por ejemplo, cuando te dicen en la calle, ¡hey, negra! Ahí pienso que hay discriminación aunque no seamos conscientes. ¿Por qué? Porque todos tenemos un nombre. ¿Por qué no? ¡Hey, chica! ¡Hey, muchacha! ¡Hey!
But the issue of being black is deeper than just words. There are underlying truths and expectations that are spoken and unspoken about all things black in the Latino family. These racist ideas have been passed from generation to generation, teaching children how to marry well, being accepted in the world by marrying someone with finer features or lighter skin, discouraging them from marrying a black woman or man. What is the correct term to use to identify someone from Latin America with more melanin in their skin? African characteristics, features, phenotype, body type, and physical appearances are also identity traits. So if the physical traits are there, then why are so many people negating their Africanness and denying blackness?
Mentira.
The issue of good hair, bad hair, is also a way for people to identify themselves as Afro-Latinos, or as a way to completely deny all connections to Africa. Afro-Latinos, the untaught story, is Latino history. It is a legacy of more than 12 million enslaved Africans who were brought to Latin America, a people who made lasting contributions that are honored and celebrated 500 years later in religion, music, dance, literature, food, family, community, and culture. Afro-Latinos, the untaught story, is one of freedom, strength, and faith.
Of African descent go back hundreds of years in Mexico, but as a group,